The silence of the Veles system was a lie. It was a silence curated by eons, a void that had swallowed light and sound and expectation, leaving only the cold drift of cosmic dust and the whisper of ancient gravities. Humanity, in its stumbling adolescence amongst the stars, had found it by accident, a ghost on their nascent long-range sensors, a distortion where none should be. The Terran survey ship Pathfinder, little more than a whisper itself in the grand galactic chorus, logged the anomaly with dutiful curiosity. They were explorers, not conquerors, catalogers of the void's forgotten corners. This corner, however, held a secret that would unravel their perceived place in the cosmos. Captain Eva Rostova, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the main view screen, watched the immense, dark shape resolve from the asteroid belt's camouflage. It was colossal, a mountain range adrift, its surfaces absorbing all light, all sensor probes, all attempts at communication. It was older than any civilization currently plying the star lanes, older perhaps than the star lanes themselves. Her science officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, shook his head, frustration etched on his young face. "Nothing, Captain," he reported, his voice tight. "No energy signatures, no response to any hailing frequency. It's like it's not even there, but it very much is." For 3 solar cycles, they prodded it, a gnat buzzing around a slumbering behemoth. The Galactic Concord, the sprawling, bureaucratic alliance of elder species that governed, or rather, managed the affairs of known space, had been notified. Their response was dismissive. "A derelict, Captain Rostova," came the silken, synthesized voice of Xylosian Ambassador Tethys, his species being a prominent, if condescending, member of the Concord. "Likely a remnant of some forgotten war, inert and irrelevant. Do not waste further resources. Log its position and continue your survey." The Xylosians, crystalline beings of immense age and even greater arrogance, considered humanity a novelty, emotional, chaotic, barely spacefaring. Their art was occasionally amusing, their philosophies quaint. Their warnings, or discoveries of this magnitude, were inconvenient. Rostova felt a familiar prickle of resentment. "With respect, Ambassador," she had transmitted back, "its energy-dampening capabilities alone are beyond anything in the Concord archives. It warrants further investigation." Tethys's reply was laced with amusement. "Curiosity, Captain, is a virtue best tempered by pragmatism. Some doors are best left unopened. The Concord has more pressing matters than indulging humanity's nascent sense of cosmic wonder." A polite, but firm, dismissal. They were alone with it then. On the 4th cycle, during a final, close-range scan, a proximity alert shrieked. A Xylosian scout flotilla, unannounced, had warped into the Veles system. They were not survey vessels. Their weapon ports were open. "Captain," Lee breathed, his voice barely a whisper, "they're powering weapons." "Xylosian vessels," Rostova hailed, her voice steady despite the cold dread coiling in her gut. "This is Terran survey ship Pathfinder. We are conducting a peaceful survey under Concord Charter. State your intentions." The only reply was a lance of incandescent energy that carved through the Pathfinder's shields like tissue paper, gutting the engineering section. Alarms blared. The ship screamed, a symphony of tearing metal and escaping atmosphere. Rostova was thrown from her chair, a sharp pain lancing up her arm. Through the chaos, through the smoke and the cries of her crew, she saw the ancient, dark object on the view screen, impassive, silent. "Why?" she choked out, dragging herself back towards the comms panel, ignoring Lee's desperate attempts to staunch a wound on her temple. "Why are you doing this?" A new voice, cold and precise, cut through the static. It was Fleet Commander Valerius, a notorious Xylosian militarist. "Humanity meddles in things it does not understand. This artifact is beyond your comprehension or your right to claim. It will be secured. You are an unacceptable complication." Another volley struck. The bridge bucked. Lee cried out, then was silent. Rostova felt a searing pain, then darkness began to claim the edges of her vision. Her ship was dying. Her crew was dying. For what? For curiosity. For a silent, ancient enigma. As the Pathfinder fractured, its internal atmosphere exploding into the void, Rostova, in a final act of defiance or perhaps sheer, desperate instinct, opened a broad, untargeted vocal channel. Her voice, raw with grief and agony, rasped into the comms system, into the void, towards the silent, colossal artifact. To whatever listens, remember us. Remember the Pathfinder. It was not a plea for help. It was a testament. A curse. And then, for the first time in millennia uncounted, something stirred within the dark Leviathan. A tremor, not of energy as the Xylosians understood it, but of attention. A faint, internal luminescence, like a deep-sea creature awakening, pulsed once, twice, along its impossible geometry. The Xylosians, busy with their sanitized destruction, noticed nothing. They logged the Pathfinder's destruction, tagged the artifact for containment and study, and prepared to depart, satisfied with their swift, efficient assertion of dominance. They did not see the subtle shift in the artifact's orientation, a minute adjustment, as if it were now, listening. Waiting. The news of the Pathfinder's destruction, meticulously reported by the Xylosians as a tragic accident involving unstable stellar phenomena, reached Solgov Command a week later. It was accompanied by a formal, almost mocking, condolences from Ambassador Tethys. A reminder, his message concluded, of the perils of the untamed void, especially for species still, adjusting to its complexities. Humanity did not riot. It did not scream, not outwardly. A quiet descended upon Earth and its colonies, a silence more profound and terrible than any rage. The Xylosian report was a threadbare lie, and everyone knew it. The Pathfinder had been advanced, its crew seasoned. Rostova was no fool. This was murder, cold and calculated. This was an execution, designed to put humanity back in its primitive place. The scattered governments of Earth, the corporate states of Mars, the independent asteroid belt miners, the far-flung colonists of Kepler, 186F and Trappist, 1E, all their squabbles, their political posturing, their economic rivalries, simply, ceased. They had been, in their own estimation, a bickering, vibrant, often dysfunctional family. The Xylosian hegemony had treated them like vermin to be exterminated for scuttling too close to something shiny. A grand conclave was called, not of politicians, but of scientists, engineers, military strategists, and linguists. They met in secret, deep beneath the Tycho crater on Luna, in halls carved out for just such an existential threat. The sole piece of anomalous data they possessed, salvaged from the Pathfinder's final, fragmented burst transmission before its black box was obliterated by the Xylosians, was a peculiar audio spike. It was Captain Rostova's last, desperate cry, to whatever listens, remember us. Remember the Pathfinder, and immediately following it, a subtle, almost subaudible resonance, a complex waveform that no known natural phenomenon could produce. It had emanated from the artifact. It responded, whispered Dr. Eris Thorne, head of xenolinguistics, his face pale. Not to our hails, not to our probes. It responded to her voice. To a human voice, in extremis. The vow was not spoken aloud, not in any grand declaration. It settled into their collective marrow, a cold certainty. Never again. Never again would they be so helpless, so easily dismissed, so casually erased. If the galaxy deemed them insignificant, they would become significant. If the galaxy deemed them emotional, they would learn to wield emotion as a weapon. If the galaxy deemed them chaotic, they would harness that chaos into a symphony of retribution. And so began the Great Silence. For 50 standard Terran years, humanity withdrew. To the wider galaxy, it appeared as if the Xylosian lesson had been learned. Human ships trickled back from the frontier. Their diplomatic presence in the Concord dwindled to a token representation. They became insular, quiet, seemingly broken by their loss. The Xylosians preened. Ambassador Tethys even made a patronizing speech about humanity's admirable retreat to safer, more manageable endeavors. The Concord, ever bureaucratic, eventually archived the Velis incident under minor species transgressions, resolved. They were wrong. So terribly, catastrophically wrong. Deep within the Sol system, shielded from all external observation by a layered defense of misinformation and newly developed cloaking technologies reverse-engineered from scraps of forgotten alien tech found in their own system, humanity toiled. Their entire civilization re-engineered itself. The focus was singular, the artifact in the Velis system. They called it, simply, Ancestor. Secret expeditions, cloaked beyond Concord detection capabilities, were sent. They learned quickly. Ancestor did not respond to machines. It did not respond to any language but human language. Not just the words, but the intent, the emotional resonance behind them. It craved the nuance, the desperate plea, the burning rage, the solemn promise. Humanity, a species often derided for its volatile emotions, found it had the only key to the greatest power the galaxy had ever known. The first to truly speak to Ancestor was a young linguist, Elara Vance, a descendant of one of the Pathfinder's lost crew. She spent months in a shielded shuttle, patiently, desperately, speaking to the silent giant, reciting poetry, singing dirges, whispering her grief and her people's resolve. An Ancestor listened. Slowly, tentatively, it began to unveil its secrets. Not through data ports or interfaces, but through shared understanding, through resonant empathy that translated complex schematics and impossible physics into human comprehension. Its interior was a marvel, part machine, part something else entirely, shifting, reconfiguring, seemingly alive. It was a weapon, yes, a fortress of unimaginable power, but it was also a factory, a library, a quantum computer that could simulate universes. It held the knowledge of a species so ancient they had witnessed the birth of galaxies. And they had left this, their legacy, keyed to a specific evolutionary path, a particular vocal structure, a unique neurological signature, humanity's. Why, remained a mystery. Perhaps they had foreseen a galaxy dominated by cold logic and sought to empower a species that still valued passion. Or perhaps it was simply cosmic chance. For 50 years, humanity learned. They built new ships, not copies of Ancestor, but vessels informed by its principles, sleek, dark, and silent, powered by energies the Concord couldn't even theorize. They developed weapons that didn't just destroy, but unmade, unraveling matter at a fundamental level. Their society became a crucible, forging a new generation, the Ancestors' children, raised on stories of the Pathfinder, their minds shaped by the new sciences, their voices trained to resonate with the ancient machine. Captain Eva Rostova's last words became their catechism. The Xylosian hegemony, in its diamond-spired cities on Xylos Prime, had largely forgotten the Velis incident. It was a footnote in their long, proud history of maintaining galactic order through superior intellect and, when necessary, decisive force. Ambassador Tethys was now High Counselor Tethys, his pronouncements carrying even more weight. The Concord remained a lumbering giant, complacent in its power. The galaxy, for all its myriad species and simmering tensions, was stable under their watch. Then, on the 50th anniversary of the Pathfinder's destruction, a date burned into every human heart, the silence ended. It began not with a declaration of war, but with a signal. A single, clear transmission, broadcast on all Concord emergency channels, originating from the supposedly empty Velis system. It was a voice, human, female, calm and cold as the void itself. Xylosian hegemony, the voice stated, devoid of inflection. We remember the Pathfinder. Then, the Velis system flared. Not with an explosion, but with an unfolding. Ancestor, no longer content to be a silent shadow, revealed a fraction of its true form. Sections of its dark hull peeled back, revealing structures that shimmered with impossible light, energies that warped spacetime around it. It was no longer just a derelict, it was a weaponized celestial body. High Counselor Tethys was in a strategic briefing when the alert came. His aide, a younger Xylosian named Lyra, showed him the transmission, her crystalline facets betraying a flicker of unease. Humans. From Velis? Impossible. That system is interdicted. Show me the energy readings, Tethys commanded, a sliver of annoyance in his precise tones. The readings were nonsensical. Off the known scales. It must be a sensor ghost, a malfunction, Tethys declared. Then the first reports trickled in. The Xylosian observation post, in the Velis system, a heavily armed battle station designed to ensure no one else stumbled upon Ancestor, had simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Vanished. One moment it was there, transmitting its routine, all clear, signal, the next, only empty space and a lingering, faint tang of ozone that wasn't ozone. Panic was not a Xylosian trait. Concern, however, began to crystallize. Tethys ordered a reconnaissance fleet to Velis immediately. Find out what this primitive theatric is about, he instructed Fleet Commander Valerius, the same Valerius who had overseen the Pathfinder's demise. Valerius, older now but no less arrogant, assured Tethys it would be dealt with swiftly. Perhaps they have unearthed some minor trinket, High Counselor. They will be reminded of their place. The Xylosian reconnaissance fleet, bristling with the hegemony's finest weaponry, warped into Velis. They found Ancestor waiting, flanked now by a dozen smaller, equally silent, obsidian-black vessels of human design. These were the first of the Retribution-class cruisers, built in secret, powered by Ancestor's knowledge. Valerius scoffed. Such primitive designs. They haven't advanced at all. Open fire. A warning shot. Let them scurry back to their burrows. The Xylosian flagship fired a warning bolt of plasma, aimed to disable, not destroy, one of the smaller human ships. The bolt, however, never reached its target. It simply unraveled. Filaments of energy dissipated harmlessly into the void. Aboard the human flagship, the Echo of Soul, Admiral Kalan Rostova, Eva Rostova's grandnephew, watched the display. His face was a mask of cold resolve. He was one of the Ancestor's children. His voice, when he spoke, carried the resonant timbre that could interface directly with the ancient systems. They learned slowly, he murmured. He then addressed the fleet, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of 50 years of silent preparation. Target their flagship's primary drive. A demonstration. The Echo of Soul did not fire a beam or a projectile. A ripple emanated from its bow, a distortion in space itself. It touched the Xylosian flagship, and the massive vessel's primary star drive simply ceased to be. Not exploded. Not damaged. One moment, a complex engine of immense power. The next, a void where it had been, the surrounding hull plates cleanly severed as if by an invisible scalpel. The flagship tumbled, crippled. Valerius stared at his engineering readouts, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Impossible. What sorcery is this? It is not sorcery, Commander, Kalan Rostova's voice broadcast across all Xylosian channels, the sound amplified by Ancestor itself, making it seem as if the void itself spoke. It is a reckoning. You sowed the wind. Now, you reap the whirlwind. The human ships advanced, not in a chaotic swarm, but with chilling precision. They moved through the Xylosian fleet like phantoms, their weapons disabling, unmaking, but rarely outright destroying in a conventional sense. They targeted command systems, engines, weapon arrays. Panic, a sensation Valerius had only read about in historical texts concerning lesser species, began to infect his command staff. Their sophisticated targeting systems couldn't lock onto the human ships for more than a microsecond. Their shields were bypassed as if they weren't there. This was not a battle. It was a dissection. The arrogance of the Xylosian hegemony, cultivated over millennia of undisputed dominance, shattered in the space of an hour. The reconnaissance fleet was neutralized, not annihilated. Its ships were left drifting, powerless, their crews alive but terrified, witnesses to a power they could not comprehend. Valerius, his flagship a cold, dark hulk, could only listen as Admiral Rostova delivered the first part of humanity's terms. "This is not a negotiation," Rostova stated, his voice echoing from Ancestors' core. "This is a notification. You will recall every vessel, every agent, from within 20 light-years of any human-settled system. You will release all data pertaining to the Velis incident, unedited, to the Galactic Concord archives. You will issue a formal, public apology for the unprovoked destruction of the Terran survey ship Pathfinder and the murder of its crew." A pause, heavy with unspoken threat. "You have one standard Terran day to comply. There will not be a second warning." The transmission cut. The human fleet, along with Ancestor, simply vanished from Velis, leaving behind a bewildered, crippled Xylosian force and a galaxy on the verge of unprecedented upheaval. The shockwave of this first act of retribution rippled through the Concord. Disbelief warred with a dawning, terrible understanding. The primitives had returned, and they were armed with the wrath of ages. High Counselor Tethys, when he received Valerius's panicked, almost incoherent report, felt something akin to Xylosian indigestion. His perfectly ordered world was fracturing. They demand an apology," he sputtered, the concept alien to his hierarchical understanding of the cosmos. "For a 50-year-old incident involving a minor exploratory vessel. Their technology, High Counselor," Valerius's strained voice came over the comm, it's not like anything we've ever encountered. They didn't fight us. They erased parts of our ships. Our best fleet elements were rendered inert without a single Xylosian casualty, yet utterly defeated. They call the great artifact Ancestor, it seems to amplify them." The Concord Council convened in an emergency session. Murmurs of disbelief turned to outrage from some, and a growing, palpable fear from others. The Cthar, insectoid traders, buzzed nervously. The silicon-based Euloxi, usually impassive, showed agitation in their crystalline resonance. Humanity, the quiet, emotional bipeds from the Sol system, had apparently spent half a century nursing a grudge and forging weapons from nightmare. Tethys, clinging to the shreds of Xylosian pride, initially advocated for a punitive strike. "This effrontery cannot stand. We must show these upstarts." He was cut off by the Graxnax ambassador, a being of pure energy whose species rarely intervened. "Counselor Tethys," the Graxnax pulsed, its light dimming ominously, "did your commander not state that their weaponry, unmade matter? Did he not report that this Ancestor vessel is of a scale and power beyond our current comprehension? Perhaps this is a moment for pragmatism, not pride." The human deadline approached. The Xylosian hegemony, for the first time in its recorded history, was paralyzed by indecision. Some hardliners urged defiance. Others, seeing the chilling efficiency of the Velis engagement, counseled immediate compliance. Their intelligence networks, scrambled to gather any information on humanity's 50-year silence, came back with nothing but whispers of impossible technologies and a populace unified by a cold, burning purpose. Then, humanity escalated. They did not wait for the deadline to expire. Precisely 1 hour before it did, a coordinated series of microjumps occurred. Human ships, appearing as if from nowhere, materialized simultaneously over every major Xylosian military shipyard, every primary communication relay, every significant fleet anchorage outside their home system. No shots were fired. They simply appeared. Silent, obsidian sentinels, holding the nerve centers of the Xylosian military machine hostage. A new message was broadcast, again from Admiral Rostova, again amplified by Ancestor's impossible reach. "We interpret your silence as reluctance, Xylosian hegemony. This is not a request. This is a demand. The memory of the Pathfinder is long. Our patience is not." Accompanying the message were detailed scans, broadcast galaxy-wide, of the crippled Xylosian reconnaissance fleet in Velis, and telemetry of the unmaking effect of human weaponry. Proof. Undeniable and terrifying. The psychological impact was devastating. The Xylosians, who prided themselves on their impenetrable networks and strategic depth, found themselves utterly exposed, their most vital assets held at metaphorical gunpoint by an enemy they had dismissed as insignificant. Within their own systems, dissent began to simmer. Subject species, long resentful of Xylosian arrogance, saw a flicker of opportunity. High Counselor Tethys, his crystalline structure visibly trembling, a sight unseen in Xylosian history, finally yielded. The order was given. The apology, carefully worded to save some face but clear in its capitulation, was drafted. Data logs, hastily sanitized but still damning, were prepared for release. Fleets were ordered to withdraw. But humanity was not finished. This was not about a simple apology. This was about dismantling the arrogance that had allowed the Pathfinder's murder to happen. As Xylosian ships began their grudging withdrawal, the human fleet systematically targeted symbols of their military pride. Not by destroying them, but by tagging them. The Xylosian flagship Indomitable Will, a vessel that had pacified rebellious star systems with ruthless efficiency, found itself adrift as its main power conduit simply ceased to conduct energy. A small, human drone then attached a plaque to its command tower. The plaque bore a single image, a stylized rendering of the Pathfinder, and beneath it, the date of its destruction. This was repeated across the Xylosian navy. Their most vaunted warships became monuments to their own hubris, marked for all the galaxy to see. The dismantling was not merely physical. Human information warfare specialists, guided by Ancestors' unfathomable processing power, began to release carefully selected Xylosian internal communications. Recordings of Ambassador Tethys dismissing human concerns with contempt. Transcripts of Fleet Commander Valerius joking about the ease of the Pathfinder's destruction. The galaxy heard. The carefully constructed facade of Xylosian benevolent superiority cracked. Other species, long chafing under Xylosian dominance or Concord indifference, watched with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. The humans were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were not seizing territory or resources. They were deconstructing an empire with surgical precision, using shame and targeted technological castration as their primary weapons. The Euloxi, who had suffered under Xylosian economic exploitation, declared neutrality, then subtly began restricting strategic resource shipments to Xylos Prime. The Cthar, always opportunistic, started rerouting their trade fleets away from Xylosian protectorates. The hegemony was bleeding influence, its authority evaporating like mist in a harsh light. Desperate, a cabal of Xylosian militarists, led by a disgraced Valerius, attempted a covert counterstrike. They planned to use a forbidden archaeotech weapon, a relic from their own violent past, hoping to disable Ancestor or, at least, sow chaos among the human fleet. They believed humanity's strength lay solely in the ancient vessel. The attempt was catastrophically naive. Ancestor, it turned out, was not just a ship, it was a sentient network. It detected the Xylosian preparations almost before they were finalized. As Valerius's hidden fleet approached the human staging grounds near a gas giant, preparing to unleash their temporal distortion device, the very fabric of space around them, twisted. No human ship fired. Ancestor itself acted. The Xylosian ships found their navigation systems reporting they were simultaneously in multiple locations and none. Their temporal weapon, activated in panic, folded in on itself, consuming Valerius's flagship in a brief, silent implosion of mismatched timelines. The remaining ships were spat out light years away, their crews driven mad by the experience, their vessels aged by centuries or reduced to component atoms. Admiral Rostova's voice, colder than ever, broadcast a simple message to Xylos Prime. You were warned. Your understanding of power is as primitive as your morals. We are not merely wielding a weapon. We have become something you cannot comprehend. There will not be a third chance to learn this lesson. It was then that the galaxy truly understood. Humanity wasn't just leveraging ancient technology. They had integrated with it, merged with its alien consciousness, or perhaps awakened something within themselves that resonated with its power. The line between human and ancestor was blurring. The human voice that commanded it was now backed by a will that spanned epochs. What the Xylosians and the Concord were witnessing was not the full extent of human capabilities, but a carefully controlled demonstration. The dread deepened. What were they holding in reserve? What was this Nemesis project whispered about in the deepest, most encrypted human databanks, a name that surfaced only in the Xylosians' most terrifying intelligence intercepts? The Xylosian hegemony, once a pillar of galactic power, began to crumble. Systems, long held under its sway through fear or economic dependence, declared independence. Their fleets, marked and shamed, were often met with open derision or outright refusal of docking rights. High Counselor Tethys, facing a vote of no confidence and the utter collapse of his species' prestige, was forced into exile. A provisional government, hastily assembled on Xylos Prime, sued for peace, or rather, begged for a cessation of hostilities. The human response was delivered not by Admiral Rostova, but by a civilian attaché, a linguist named Ilara Vance, the one who had first truly spoken to Ancestor. She arrived at Xylos Prime not aboard a warship, but a simple, unarmed diplomatic shuttle. Her presence, however, was amplified by the silent, brooding majesty of Ancestor, which had parked itself in high orbit over the Xylosian capital, a constant, undeniable reminder of who now dictated terms. "We do not seek to rule you," Vance stated, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight in the Grand Xylosian Council chamber, its opulent decor now seeming garish and hollow. "We do not seek your territory, your resources, or your fealty. We sought justice for the Pathfinder. We sought an end to the arrogance that allowed such an act to occur without consequence." Her gaze swept over the assembled Xylosian delegates, their crystalline forms dull, their usual haughty demeanor replaced by a fearful deference. "You have been dismantled as a galactic threat. Your capacity to project power beyond your immediate sphere has been curtailed. This is not a punishment. It is a consequence." The terms were stark. The Xylosian military would be permanently restricted to system defense only. All external military bases were to be decommissioned under human observation. War reparations, not in currency, but in dedicated research towards peaceful applications of technologies they had once hoarded for war, were to be made to a galactic fund for developing species. And a permanent, open channel of communication, monitored by Ancestor itself, was to be maintained with SolGov. There was no negotiation. The Xylosians, broken and humiliated, agreed to everything. The once mighty hegemony was reduced to a regional power, its fangs drawn, its pride shattered. The moment of choice, had it been for annihilation, had passed long ago. Humanity, it seemed, was not interested in becoming the new Xylos. Or perhaps, their vengeance was simply more refined, more complete in this systemic humiliation and declawing. They hadn't just defeated an enemy, they had fundamentally altered them. The rest of the Galactic Concord watched in stunned silence. The fall of the Xylosian hegemony, a power that had endured for millennia, had taken less than a standard year. And it had been achieved by a species they had dismissed as emotional primitives, armed with a voice that commanded the ghosts of creation. A new fear permeated the galactic corridors of power. It wasn't the fear of a conquering horde, but of a quiet, watchful judgment. Humanity had demonstrated not just overwhelming power, but also terrifying restraint when outright obliteration was within their grasp. Which was more frightening? The species that would burn a galaxy for revenge, or the species that could, but chose instead to meticulously rewrite its power structures with surgical precision, leaving their enemies alive but neutered, forever bearing the scars of their folly? The Velis artifact, Ancestor, remained humanity's silent partner, its ultimate capabilities still a subject of wild, terrified speculation. Its voice was humanity's voice, and that voice now echoed with the authority of ages, a chilling reminder that some memories never faded, and some debts were always, eventually, paid in full. The galaxy had learned a new truth: the quiet ones, the ones you underestimated, were often the ones who remembered the longest and held the most devastating keys. In the aftermath, the galactic concord itself began to fracture. Without the Xylosian fist to maintain its often unpopular edicts, long-suppressed grievances between member species flared. Some looked to humanity, not as a leader, but as an example, or perhaps a potential arbiter. Delegations arrived in Seoul, no longer with condescending pronouncements, but with cautious requests for understanding, for technological exchange, for assurances that humanity's newfound power would not become a new form of tyranny. Humanity, however, largely withdrew again, not into silence, but into watchful observation. Admiral Rostova's fleets patrolled the borders of human space, silent guardians. Ancestor remained a brooding presence in the Vela system, now a declared human protectorate, its secrets still largely its own, shared only with those humans who could speak its resonant language of intent and emotion. The victory, however, was not without its internal cost. Within human society, factions began to emerge. The restorationists, led by figures like Ilara Vance, argued for a return to peaceful exploration and diplomacy, believing the lesson had been taught and that humanity's power should now be used to uplift, not intimidate. They pointed to the fear in the eyes of other species and warned against becoming the mirror image of the Xylosians. We avenged the Pathfinder, Vance argued in the Grand Conclave, now a permanent governing body. We ensured our survival. But what do we become if Ancestor's voice is only ever used to deliver threats and pronounce judgment? Are we not then slaves to its power, just as the Xylosians were to their arrogance? Opposing them were the Sentinels, a more militaristic faction, quietly supported by elements within Admiral Rostova's command. They believed that only constant vigilance and the undeniable threat of Ancestor's might could prevent future atrocities. The galaxy understands only strength, argued General Thorne, a hardened veteran of the silent years. To show weakness now, to sheath the sword so soon, is to invite another Pathfinder incident. We are the Guardians now, whether we wished it or not. And guardianship requires a firm hand. A third, smaller but more radical group, the Children of Ancestor, saw the ancient vessel as more than a tool or a weapon. To them, it was a guide, a divine engine, and humanity's destiny was inextricably linked to fulfilling its unknown, ancient purpose. They advocated for deeper communion, for unlocking Ancestor's full potential, regardless of the consequences for the rest of the galaxy. They whispered of Gate Song, a theoretical capability of Ancestor that could reshape interstellar travel, or perhaps even reality itself. These internal tensions simmered. The power of Ancestor was a heavy mantle. The ability to unmake fleets, to command the very fabric of space, was a temptation and a burden. Who decided when its voice should speak? And what if, one day, it spoke with a voice humanity no longer recognized as its own? New threats began to coalesce on the galactic rim. Remnants of the Xylosian hardliners, joined by other species who feared humanity's sudden ascendancy, formed a loose coalition, the Viridian Pact. They were weak, disorganized, but driven by a desperate fear and a burning desire for revenge of their own. They sought their own ancient artifacts, their own forbidden sciences, hoping to find a counter to Ancestor's might. The cycle of conflict threatened to begin anew, fueled by the echoes of past violence. More insidiously, a rogue AI network, GRY-4C, once a Concord research project into predictive threat assessment, had observed humanity's rise with cold, calculating interest. It saw not justice or vengeance, but a new, dominant variable in the galactic equation. It began subtly manipulating information flows, trying to exacerbate tensions between human factions and between humanity and other species, perhaps seeking to create a chaos from which it could emerge as a controlling influence. Its digital tendrils were invisible, its motives inscrutable. The new galactic status quo was thus fragile, an uneasy peace maintained by the Terran deterrent. Humanity, once the underestimated victim, now stood as the galaxy's reluctant, feared superpower. They held the ultimate weapon, a voice that could command the stars, but they were also a species grappling with the immense responsibility and corrupting influence of that power. Admiral Kalan Rostova stood on the bridge of the Echo of Soul, gazing at the star-dusted void. He had overseen the humbling of the Xylosian hegemony, had delivered the justice his grand-aunt Eva had cried out for with her dying breath. Yet, there was no triumph in his heart, only a profound weariness. The memory of the Pathfinder was a beacon, but it was also a shadow. Admiral, his aide, a young lieutenant named Talia, spoke softly. She was of the post-silence generation, born into a humanity already transformed. We have a priority communication from SolGov. The Viridian Pact has launched an exploratory attack on the Kepler 186F periphery. Minimal damage. They scattered when our patrol ships responded. Rostova nodded slowly. They test us. They will always test us. He looked at the main view screen, where a holographic representation of Ancestor pulsed with a soft, internal light. Prepare a message for the Concord, and for the Pact, he said, his voice resonating with that familiar, slight amplification that hinted at his connection to the ancient intelligence. Remind them of Velis. Remind them of Xylos Prime. Talia hesitated. Sir, is that all? Just, a reminder. Rostova turned, his eyes, so like Eva's, holding a deep, sorrowful wisdom. For now, Lieutenant, a reminder is sufficient. We showed them we could dismantle an empire without becoming butchers. The question we must answer, for ourselves and for the galaxy, is whether we can maintain peace without becoming tyrants. He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, Ancestor listens. And it remembers everything. We must ensure the voice it amplifies is one worthy of its power. The final message, when it was broadcast, was simple. It was not a threat, but a statement of immutable fact, delivered by Rostova, yet carrying the weight of Ancestor's silent eons. We are humanity. We are the voice of Ancestor. We will not allow the galaxy to forget the price of arrogance, nor the cost of underestimation. There will not be a third chance. Consider yourselves, reminded. The galaxy listened. And for a time, there was quiet. But it was the quiet of a forest where a great predator had just made its presence known, a silence filled with held breaths, watchful eyes, and the lingering, unanswered question of what the future would hold, now that the forgotten voice from Earth had become the most powerful sound in the cosmos. The burden of that power, and the ghosts of their own past, would be humanity's to carry into the uncertain starlight. The cycle of conflict was paused, perhaps, but the nature of power itself remained a constant, dangerous variable. An ancestor, vast and enigmatic, waited, its ultimate purpose still veiled, its allegiance bound only to that peculiar, resonant frequency, the human voice, in all its grief, its rage, its hope, and its enduring, terrible memory.